Thanks to Milwaukee Preservation Alliance and Dawn. And thank you to everybody that joined today. It's a pleasure to see so many taking a little time out during lunch. So just a brief introduction. My name is Chris Socha. I'm a partner architect with Kubala Washako. I lead our Walker's Point-based studio called TKWA UrbanLab. And you can find us on 5th Street. We're right next door to Fuel Cafe, across the street from the old La Fuente building. And so, yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I've been with TKWA for a long time. It's 22 years, and I think at this point. And what I'm really passionate about in the world of architecture is creating vibrancy. And what this discussion is going to sort of point to today is it's not only buildings that kind of create the places that we love in cities, it's the space between that's of equal importance. And so some projects or work that I've been deeply involved with over the years include Colectivo Coffee and the myriad of cafes that are in our city and beyond at this point, the Milwaukee Public Market in the 3rd Ward, and year 4 of the Odyssey, which has been restoring and adaptively repurposing the Grand Avenue Mall in downtown Milwaukee. So you'll see that coming online in this coming year. So, okay, so we've titled this Preservation for People, and the focus today is really on adaptive reuse and sustainability in Walker's Point, fairly specifically in the 2nd Street, 5th Street corridor, as you'll see. And so just a brief history. So Walker's Point, really acknowledged as Milwaukee's oldest neighborhood, dating back to the 1830s. It's a wonderful place. It's incredibly diverse, and its history is incredibly diverse in terms of the makeup of people that historically called this home and who call it home today. And so this is just sort of a smattering of buildings and businesses that are certainly recognized as institutions in the neighborhood, and they really need no further explanation. So what I find so fascinating about Walker's Point is sort of the collision of architecture and people. It's this neighborhood where humble housing, ornate housing sits side by side by industry, by businesses, and it's always been that way. And it dates back to this fellow, George Walker, who came to Wisconsin via Virginia. And he was one of the 3 pioneering founders of the city of Milwaukee. And so the map that you're seeing before you right now is kind of the historic grid of Milwaukee. And if you know your Milwaukee history, where you see the 3, you'll recognize as Juneautown, currently Easttown. West of that on 4, Ward 4, was Kilbourne Town, currently known as Westtown. And then Ward 5, or the 5th Ward, it was Walker's Point. And, Walker was really strategic with his selection of this particular portion of Milwaukee adjacent to the mouth of Lake Michigan, accessible via land roadways and eventually the railway. And so it was a strategic location that curiously over time found itself developing at a much different pace than his neighbors to the north. And so this is an aerial view. Lake Michigan is, of course, on the bottom. You'd be looking west towards the top of the screen, and you can kind of get a sense of early Milwaukee when the Menominee River was becoming more of a canal and more supportive of industry in the valley. And you can kind of see the radical reshaping that was happening at this time. So Walker's Point, as we know it today, is bound by kind of 4 distinct boundaries, and I would argue it's a little fuzzier on the east edge, but Cesar Chavez, our 16th Street on the west, the Valley or Menominee River to the north, Greenfield to the south, and 1st Street to the east. And I would argue really that the Inner Harbor and all the way to the river is really Walker's Point. And historically that was the case. And so here we are today. See if I can advance to the next slide. So John Gerda, our beloved Milwaukee historian, talks about in his most recent book that this was really been called the last relatively intact 19th century neighborhood. What we know about the neighbors to the north is they developed at a very different pace. And if you love Around the Corner with John McGivern like I do, you can go back to, I believe it was season 2, and catch a really wonderful story on Walker's Point. And where the Johns are both standing there right now is on 3rd Street. This was Walker's Point's kind of realm of stately homes. And John Gerda tells the wonderful story of kind of the history of people here, and it's German immigrants, it was Irish, Polish, Scandinavian, and today it's really the largest Spanish-speaking congregation of people in the entire state of Wisconsin. And we're here really to kind of focus on the architecture, but architecture and the people are really what makes cities, vibrant places. And Milwaukee as a community recognized the importance of Walker's Point as a historic neighborhood back in the mid-70s. And in 1978, an organization had formed that added Walker's Point to the National Register of Historic Places. It was called the Walker's Point Historic District. It remains a historic district nationally recognized today. And really, you can read the history about how this happened, but effectively, Juneautown and Kilbourne Town, they were savvier in the development of those parts of the city. They've been remade over, many times over to date, whereas Walker's Point has, in some ways, stood still in time. It has an incredible collection of 19th century buildings here. And curiously, the recognition of Walker's Point as a special historic neighborhood ultimately led to what we understand is Historic Milwaukee, Inc. today. So Walker's Point has really been at the heart of preservation in this city for a long time. So that's just a brief history. There's much more out there to find, but what we're going to talk about today is why the fact that Walker's Point sort of has the character it has today, how it supports sort of this wonderful environment that is been seen as valuable for a long time and poised for just a really positive future. And so a lot of that has to do with the way the buildings have been adaptively repurposed over time. And so this is a shot of 6th Street. And I think what's important to sort of recognize here is, I can kind of put myself back in time looking at this photo and imagine, boy, that was probably a pretty vibrant, alive place. Look at the scale of the buildings, look at the density, the diversity. Sidewalk wasn't as large as you would hope, but you can imagine that this was a pretty lively environment. And so what I would argue here is really, when we talk about vibrancy, what does it actually mean? Well, the public realm, which is the space between buildings. So the public realm, defined by its architecture, but defined by its characteristic urban design, and most importantly, its uses. They drive vibrancy in cities. And let's talk about what that means. So Milwaukee has a vibrant past, without a doubt. I always enjoy sharing this photo of Wisconsin Avenue. Talk about a sense of place there, right? This was Milwaukee's commercial corridor. The residue of its historic significance still lives with all of us. You didn't have to be part of this particular era to sort of understand its importance, but it's had a sense of place. And it's the architecture, it's the uses, it's the shape of the buildings, the shape of the street that really drove this as kind of the heart of our city. And we can recognize other sort of wonderful neighborhoods in the city today that retain their historic character. And it's that historic character, the scale of the streets, the way they move, the way buildings are easy to adapt, that draw people, that attract people. And so how do you know you're in a vibrant place? Well, you see people. That's what it's all about at the end of the day. And of course, many of you will recognize this as Brady Street, of course, taken during a festival. you can be on Brady Street just about any time of the day and find it full of life. So I've argued for a long time that there's really nothing more important in the pursuit of making a whole city, a vibrant city, that you can't have it without a great public realm. And so our point of focus really has to be lasered on, are we creating a public realm that is in support of the cities that we want? And so this is a slide I've shared in previous talks that I just keep going back to because it talks about the way we have treated our cities over time. You know, they started as being places for people that slowly were eroded away to become places for cars to drive through and be stored. And the Swedish road administration, they commissioned an artist named Carl Gilg to represent how have cities been treated over the years. And I just think this is one of the most fitting artistic expressions of how you feel sometimes in certain settings where the car is king, walking feels like you're next to canyons, and it's tenuous at best. And so we aim to fix that. And over the years, there's been kind of a collective consciousness that's happened, not just locally, but across the world, that we need to correct this. We need to recognize the value of place within cities and reprioritize things. So there are many places around the world that are now saying, listen, when we think about mobility, when we think about how we move through a city, when we think about how we enjoy time in the city, we need to reorganize who it's for. And so if you created a mobility kind of funnel here, you'd see pedestrians at the top, followed by bikes and transit and commercial vehicles, and single occupancy vehicles way at the bottom. Accommodate cars, don't mow over your city for them. And so Walker's Point, again, let's bring it back to our neighborhood. It was severed, of course, years ago by freeway construction. You know, that has forever kind of altered the landscape of the neighborhood. Thankfully, you know, so much of the historic integrity remains intact. And we're going to focus on two streets in particular here and kind of talk about how street design and buildings start to create a really alive place. And so it starts with 2nd Street, formerly called Reed Street, by the way. So in 2010, 2nd Street was completely reimagined. So this is a photo taken pre-2010. It's almost shocking to look south down towards the Allen Bradley clock and to see just what rough shape that road was in. Now, while the state of the asphalt and all that is shocking, to me, what's more shocking is how wasteful this street was. I mean, 2 lanes of traffic, narrow sidewalks. You know, this was clearly a space to drive fast through, not really a place to stay. And so around 2010, a vision was pitched to reimagine 2nd Street, to put it on a diet, what we often refer to as a road diet, and take 2 lanes of traffic down to 1 in each direction, add bike lanes, add street trees, widen sidewalks. And so this happened. And believe it or not, Carmageddon did not arrive. People can still move through it, flow through it seamlessly, but what it attracted was amazing redevelopment, because the beauty of 2nd Street, and we'll see in 5th Street, is the building stock that lines up and down the corridor. And so not every project that you see on the screen right now followed 2nd Street's redo, but the Clock Shadow Creamery building was part of that, Purple Door Ice Cream, etc. So there's just wonderful buildings up and down 2nd Street, and now with a reinvigorated street that has invited people to be there on foot, to be there on bike, transit, by car, etc. It's kind of set it up for success that we've been seeing over the years. Now, a few years, about 5-6 years after the 2nd Street redo, the city turned their attention to 5th Street, formerly known as Grove Street. And it's really an interesting corridor, I would argue. Part of what I find kind of fascinating about its potential for adaptive reuse, its potential to become one of Milwaukee's next great commercial corridors, has to do with the fact that it's clearly bookended on 2 sides. To the north, you have the 6th Street roundabout. To the south, you have I-94 kind of doing a zigzag to effectively terminate the street. And so what does that mean? Why is that important? Well, a couple things that are important here. Number one, it has kind of clear end caps. So it's not a street that you drive through quickly necessarily because of its distinct north-south conditions. And again, wonderful buildings that line the street up and down. Historically, it's always been a prominent commercial corridor in Walker's Point. This photo dates back to a German market street festival that used to take place on 5th or Grove Street back then. You can see on the left what was the Milwaukee, most recently the Milwaukee Ballet Building, historically Schlitz Palm Garden. That Palm Garden was built after the success of their sort of flagship location in Kilbourne Town or West Town on roughly 3rd Street today. By the way, when you go to the 3rd Street Market Hall when it opens next spring, the old Schlitz Palm Garden actually resides right almost in the middle of that space. So it was a really kind of interesting thing to see as we were researching the history of West Town. So here's 5th Street pre-2017. And so this is what I would describe as, from an urban design point of view, as a fast, angry street. You can see it has it has angled parking on 2 sides, wide drive lanes, and almost an insultingly narrow sidewalk. It was not even 8 feet wide, littered with, all sorts of impediments in between. And so, and just another shot looking north. So the city put forth a vision that again said, well, 2nd Street went on this road diet that was really successful. Let's apply the same principles on 5th. And we here at TKWA kind of got to work behind the scenes with the city, with interested folks in the neighborhood, kind of trying to create some buy-in for the idea that 5th Street could have tremendous value if we slow it down a little bit and really give it over to people. This is a shout out to Jeremy Janine with Urban Milwaukee, who had a photo, some wonderful photos and storytelling back from the time of construction. And here's 5th Street today. Views taken from Google Street View are never the most flattering because of the angle of the lens, but you get the idea here. Angled parking to parallel parking, narrower drive lanes, sidewalks about 18 feet wide, street trees, bike racks, bioswales. It's a totally different environment. And you can see the quality of the buildings up and down the street. So here it is today, taken from basically the southernmost terminus looking north back to the Iron Horse and the 6th Street roundabout. And I just think it's fascinating that the city has kind of come full circle. You remember that German street festival that we saw a few minutes ago. Well, what happened since in 2017, Walker's Point found its great festival in 5th Street Fest, and it's no surprise that it landed on 5th Street. Again, you invest in place, you invest in kind of the quality of the urban realm, and it attracts things like this because people recognize all the value around it. So we're going to go through some buildings here that are in support of kind of the wonderful work that was done to the streetscape itself. And we're going to go kind of up and down the 5th Street corridor, starting on the north end. And we're going to just look at some highlights here. And we're going to start with the Iron Horse Hotel. So TKWA worked on this project some years back. This was really kind of one of the, I would call it catalytic projects in the Walker's Point recent history that's spurred some of the redevelopment that we're seeing to date. This building was built in 1907. It was originally the Burger Bedding Factory and had been used for storage and cold storage. And, it was in fairly rough shape. Cosmetically, at least, the bones were fantastic. And so you see this building today. This was a historic tax credit project, as a number of the projects, almost all of the projects, frankly, that you're going to see here today were part of that program. And so this was adaptive adaptively repurposed into a boutique hotel. The hotel has been recognized as one of the top boutique hotels in the country on multiple occasions. What's sort of significant about the building is the timber beam structure here. And it really comes forward in the look and feel of the building itself. You're on the second level looking down into a lobby space below, and it's the timbers really kind of carry the day here. Next door to the Iron Horse Hotel is the Bricks apartment building. And so this is a photograph from a few years back. And, you know, Bricks was this beautiful building built in 1912, originally the George Ziegler Candy Company. And it's the city's first concrete skeleton frame building. So it has an interesting structure to it. And while the structure is fascinating and beautiful, to me, what's important about the building in terms of storytelling through the lens we're looking through today is what happens at the ground level. It would have been really easy on Florida, which is could be considered an east-west side street, you know, in Walker's Point. Attention here was to ensure that that ground floor was actively contributing to the public realm. So you have entry lobby for the apartment, you have a patisserie there now, you have a cider company, you have another tenant space on the left-hand side of this screen or on the west side that's going to be fit out with another commercial use. And so this is a building that has attracted residents. It's a building that has attractive non-residents because there are reasons to be there because of the businesses that inhabit the space. And so it's really a wonderful building. And what this project did is it solved some issues relative to parking. You can see on the left-hand side of your screen, a contemporary structured parking addition with a green roof that was added during time of construction. And what this allowed for was there was no parking available in the Bricks building itself. And so TKWA was able to shoehorn in on a lower sub-basement, a basement level, and on the backside of the first floor parking space. But then this is auxiliary and shared with the Iron Horse Hotel. What's curious about this building is if you look in the lower left-hand corner of the rooftop green roof, you'll see a blue steel handrail. And that is a knockout that would eventually provide for a bolted on bridge that would span over the railroad tracks and connect basically the Florida street over to just north to the kind of water incubation or water accelerator center. So this is a really cool project that's thinking about kind of the neighborhood connectivity, you know, spanning kind of impediments like the railway. And it had a real focus on sustainability. That's the state's first blue-green roof. And what that means is the rooftop on the parking addition can actually store stormwater and delay its passage into the city's stormwater management system. So that's a first in the state right there. And here's a view taken from on top of the roof. And this is amenity for tenants. So rather than, let's say, bolt on balconies for apartment units, which would not have been accepted by the National Park Service, the parking structure was purposed in such a way that it becomes a shared outdoor amenity for tenants, but also considers via easement with the city of Milwaukee a future right-of-way connection to the north. Next, we're going to go to Coakley's headquarters here. So this was built in the 1910s through the 1920s. Really, there's kind of a couple significant buildings that you can see as evidenced by the photo here. Significant water tower once stood on top of the building on the 7-story portion. We'll see where that has been repurposed today. This was also a concrete skeleton frame building. It was known as a daylight industrial loft due to the character of the large industrial sash steel windows. And if you fast forward some years, this was pre-reconstruction here, where you can see a lot of the windows have been painted over time. Really, that's storage space that you're seeing on the upper levels of the floor. And so TKWA had the pleasure of working with Coakley and Brothers to kind of reimagine this facility and breathe new life into it. And it turned into what you see before you now. And it is this wonderful light-filled building. Those are all new steel or aluminum industrial sash windows that just flood the building with wonderful daylight. And of course, there is the iconic art water tower featured in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. And I'll never forget the day, watching this piece be hoisted up to the roof. It was just wonderful to see the neighborhood come together for this kind of topping off ceremony. And it is now an icon, really, of Walker's Point, and a wonderful nod to the city's history. And the funny thing is we had some trouble getting National Park Service to buy into this at the outset. And the fear was that the water tower might distract from the character of the building itself. And we were able to craft an argument that said, the water tower support existed, and that it was important storytelling because so many of these water towers no longer exist, to bring it back in a way that was respectful of its proportions and sort of scale originally, but discernible clearly as being something from today. So here's kind of just a pulled away aerial view that sees these three buildings together and the impact of their adaptive repurposing on this very important part of Walker's Point. And I think, what this photo also highlights is we have some work to do in the public realm yet in the form of that roundabout. I don't know if you've ever been on foot and tried to cross it, but good luck to you. Look to the Dutch. Always look to the Dutch if you want to figure out how to do streets right. They figure this out. I'm very hopeful that we get some advocates in the room that will start to kind of push our roundabout to become really a wonderful urban place. So let's move all the way south down 5th Street, and we're going to look at Arts at Large now. So this is another one that TKWA had the pleasure to work on a few years back, and it's just a wonderful building with a curious history. This was originally commissioned and built by Patrick Cudahy. Of course, you'll know him as kind of the great meatpacking, entrepreneur. And I just want to thank Arts at Large for sharing some of the history with me this week. I had to kind of re-jog my brain, but what I found so interesting about its past is that Patrick Cudahy, when he built this, hired a fellow by the name of Reinhold Mueller, and he was a German immigrant that created a meat market in this building and lived in an apartment above it. And what was kind of interesting about it is it was built with intention to have employees be people of different nationalities, so that customers could kind of be comfortable in speaking their own language. And so, if you think of Walker's Point as this dynamic melting pot historically, Patrick Cudahy was kind of on the leading edge of recognizing the importance of the diversity and hiring or creating this enterprise here that really spoke to that. Because what's so fascinating is if you look at those that interacted with this building and their backgrounds, the owners were Irish, Polish, Jewish, and Russian. The residents in the neighborhood were German, Norwegian, Danish, Mexican, Polish, and the business operators were German, Polish, and Jewish. So, this wonderful mix, and that is honored today. In the building itself, was another historic tax credit project working with National Park Service. And we really had to be sensitive to kind of the existing character of the building itself. So it largely looks as it was originally, windows redone, repainting. The storefront windows on the ground floor were repurposed. They're wood storefront windows. The wood was retained when possible and then recreated when it wasn't possible. And the windows employ clear glass as required by National Park Service. And of course, the new awnings really kind of define that ground floor. And so on the inside, it's this wonderful daylit building with a series of collaborative spaces. Arts at Large, if you're not familiar with them, is really a local treasure, a nonprofit group that brings the arts to students, kids in the city and beyond. They really, I think, carry the legacy of the original intent of this building in reaching across culture and communities to really bring people together in a wonderful way. And so the building traces that history. Much of the historic fabric remains as it was. On the second level, where there's collaborative space, you can see the character of the wood casing and the doors and the flooring is all intact and was required to be in a lot of ways. Historic stairwells, historic skylights were retained, where partitions were allowed to be removed. The history of them was traced in the architecture of the ceiling. And kind of coming to the exterior, where we think about how can we enliven the public realm with something new, a really sensitive addition was done on the south side of the building. And so what the addition facilitated was accessible entry. If you were paying close attention in the earlier photos, you'll note that there are steps up from the sidewalk into the historic portion of the building. And so this allowed for a seamless entry, kind of a sun-bathed courtyard, new elevator, and a nice little sort of almost reprieve from the streetscape here in the form of like a little sort of pocket park, if you will. So just a wonderful space that contributes to the life of the anchoring, I would say, the southern end of Fifth Street. And there are all sorts of wonderful projects that have happened in between the north and south nodes. This is a project on National and Fifth Street, a building that had a raise order on it not many years ago that is currently being repurposed. I believe this is a historic tax credit project, fully glazed, ground level, that will, I hope, have commercial use in it, with future residents that will live in the apartments above. So just wonderful to see a building that was really on its last legs, cared for and brought back to life, and will anchor really a very significant intersection at Fifth and National. This brings us to kind of TKWA's story about UrbanLab. So that's our home right there in those kind of 4 small windows below the for lease or for sale sign. So that's 640 South Fifth Street. This was no great shakes when we got it, and I think that's what's interesting. So this building is owned by Mark Lathers, who is with Kelly Construction. Mark bought this building maybe 5 years back with his family. This was a plating facility, 20,000 square feet, that hadn't been in use since, I believe, 2007. And you can see that it didn't contribute a lot to the street in terms of helping the life of Fifth Street as a people place. It was pretty monolithic, small windows, very industrial, sort of closed off. And so there's a view from within looking back at the at the old La Fuente building across the street. So what we did is we asked Mark, hey, can we help you reimagine this place? And let's take a building that was 20,000 square feet, single use, and look to the history of Fifth Street as being small scale, as being multi-use as a street, and let's find a way to make that come together. And so this is where adaptive reuse, this is not a historic tax credit project, this is pure adaptive reuse, which means, anything can kind of happen from a design perspective. So we tore down the CMU wall that was the loading area and really opened up the facade. And so here you kind of see it mid-construction. So where we tore down that wall, that has become a courtyard space, and it's really the beating heart of the complex. This is our home. This is UrbanLab. So you remember those four small square windows, completely torn down, opened up to the street, clad in a weathering steel panel. You can see the courtyard here just to the north of the building. We filleted the building open in a way that it has overhead doors going into kind of a central courtyard space shared with fuel, shared with juice, shared with proximity malt, all users of this building. And it's become this wonderful people-centric place that has just breathed a new life into our kind of little block here. And so there we are, we're looking west across the street. Pay attention to the building that's just circled, that humble former tavern with an apartment above. So what I want to share here is, as you think about the adaptive reuse of neighborhoods and really kind of the life of neighborhoods, it's important to remember that it's a fabric. And while we're focused on Fifth Street in this talk, it's every bit as important to ensure that the life of the adjacent streets are supported. And so great neighborhoods turn corners. Great neighborhoods lead you to the next place. And so I wanted to talk just for a moment here, and we're almost to the end of this, about Zocalo. So a few years back, we had the pleasure of working with developer Sean Phelan and food entrepreneur Jesus Gonzalez. Jesus, you may know from his food truck Mazorca that used to be on First in Pittsburgh. He's a food genius. There's no doubt about it. And so we took this humble little building and turned it into a food truck park. And so what I love about it is it shows the value, the embodied energy, the value and embodied energy of historic buildings or existing buildings for that matter. It would have been very easy to knock the main building down. It was in rough shape. I mean, parts of it didn't have a foundation. The walls were all over the place. This was a dive bar on the first floor with very low ceilings. And I guess you'd call it a dive apartment above. It was rough. And so now it's home to food entrepreneurs. It's catalyzed sort of a whole new development frontier on 6th Street. And this is a photo of the south-facing outdoor space on the south side of the building. Of course, you can see the main structures to the left. We did just enough on it. It had a real shoestring budget, reclad the building, created some new openings that are kind of large openings that make it kind of a seamless indoor-outdoor experience. Clearly defined the south-facing space as a people zone here, and before this building didn't claim the corner because it was just sort of open grass, and it does so now. So I just want to end the talk on, the simple observation that at the end of the day, it's people that make places great. And you attract people when you create the framework to bring them together. And that's what is so important, so vital when you think about redoing or kind of rethinking a neighborhood, and from the smallest places to the biggest places. And so, the story of 2nd Street, the story of 5th Street, it really starts with recognizing that there's value in rethinking the sort of shared environment, the public space in between. And then you have to work with such care and intention to ensure that the buildings are contributing back to it. So it's this constant dance, this constant sort of back and forth, street reinforcing buildings, buildings reinforcing street, making sure you're making places for people. And when you can do it with existing building stock, there's nothing more sustainable that you can do. Start there, keep the building out of the landfill, recognize that we can't rebuild these places for a number of reasons. And so it's really been fun to be a participant in kind of the ongoing renewal of Walker's Point, and we're really excited to kind of stay on that path. And so with that, I want to thank the Milwaukee Preservation Alliance. Please visit their website, consider a donation. A wonderful group that is kind of bringing awareness to all of us in the city of the importance of our historic and existing building fabric. So we're going to open this up to Q&A. Jeremy, perhaps I send this back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. That was just fantastic. It makes me super proud to be on Fifth Street also as we speak in the wonderful Arts at Large building. And to be to all of those amazing connections. And I think that this connection is facilitated by the type of an urban environment that you were talking about. So I wanted to at this time, anybody please feel free to post questions in the chat. Love to have a dialogue going here for the next 10 minutes or so. I thought I would just start out while people are thinking with questions. Coming up with questions, just as things like as places like Fifth Street go from kind of a quick through street dead zone type of an area to somewhere that's more desirable, how do we kind of balance that kind of the development pressure and things that come with that desirability, and think about results from that are respectful of the character of the neighborhood that exists there, and whether that's through reuse or compatible infill, or kind of help us think about that.
Sure. Well, I think when you're in a neighborhood as unique as Walker's Point, it always starts with filling in the cavities first. If you think about a street as being kind of gap-toothed because a building's been torn down over time, you feel it missing in a fabric that's fairly coherent and held together. And so I think when you start with an infill first approach, that's always positive, because as you remake neighborhoods, the value in the building that exists is value for so many different reasons. It's not just the embodied energy of saving it from a landfill. It's the fact that that building is probably cheaper to inhabit because it's been paid for once or twice or many times. And if you read Jane Jacobs' Death and Life of the Great American City, she talks about that quite a bit. The value of having a mix of buildings from different areas, because they have different economic structures, and they also kind of contribute to the fabric in a different way. So I think you have to start with kind of how do you retain what's best and what's valuable there. Then how do you create new with real intention and start from use? Sadly, it's like so much redevelopment today it's purely an economic equation, and it's not really necessarily always driven by what's the use that's going to inject the most life into Walker's Point as a place, but it's how can I extract as much money as possible out of the development of a particular building. And that's a mindset that we need to change if we're really going to truly create value in cities. And it's why we try to align ourselves with folks that understand that value comes in many different forms. And if you do a project well that contributes to the health of a neighborhood, the bottom line is almost always paid back, on that investment that is made.
Awesome. Thank you. We got a question from Scott, who's asking, are historic tax credits still available? We used them 20 years ago and couldn't have built in this neighborhood without them. I think the answer is yes, but maybe that's an opportunity for you to, can you talk a little bit about the importance of tax credits in helping some of those projects go forward?
They're vital. As you can see in a lot of these buildings, is they were in tough shape. And, when I put my developer hat on, appreciate the economic equation to bring that back to life and make it work today. And so, you can still retain state and federal tax credits. I believe it's still 20% of construction costs for each. And so add that up, and that's 40% of your construction costs that can come back in the form of tax credits. And so I can assure you many projects that have happened here and throughout the city probably would not have happened without that, that kind of tax credit foundation. And so, yes, they're still available. Politically, it got a little interesting in Wisconsin a few years ago when there was some threat of diminishing the state credit. And thankfully, a lot of people stepped forward and fought for it because I think whatever side of the aisle you're on, we can all recognize the value in creating great places as, you know, through the work of rebuilding historic zones. And so the beauty of Walker's Point is it's on the National Register as a historic place. And so your part one is effectively taken care of because you're recognized as being part of the district.
Awesome, excellent. I had a question from Rachel then asking about how can we encourage the city to do more street diets? How do we replicate that? If there may be a tough.
Yeah, be an advocate, show up for meetings. That's how it works. You know, I often say that we get the city that we ask for, you know, and so for years, people weren't showing up asking for making a place slower, for making it a place for walking for people. What people were clamoring for was, how do I get here by car as fast as I can and get out as fast as I can? And the city accommodated that for a number of reasons for a number of years, and that is slowly being corrected. So start with your alder. You know, your alder person is your kind of go-to representative. And I have found that, you know, many of our current alders are very aware of kind of the value of placemaking, the value of kind of rethinking the streetscape. So start there, start with your city officials, and then show up to speak in support and rally support for these kind of places. And the good news is there is a awakening, you know, and it's been happening for years, and we just have to keep demanding the city that we want.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, advocate. Don't be afraid to talk to your elders. Let them know they're there to hear from you. Had another great question come in from Peter, who says, excellent presentation. He's curious, what is the street that currently has little development activity, but potential to be another great pedestrian oriented business district? So what is the next Fifth Street or Brady Street?
Well, I think there's a few. I would stay in Walker's Point for a moment and recognize National as being kind of one of the next great frontiers. National, you know, as you work from the lake east out to the west, is lined with building after building that is historically interesting, you know, contributes to a sense of place. The problem with National is it's a fast, angry street like Fifth Street was, even more so. It has issues in the sense that I believe National is also a state highway. And anytime you have the state DOT as part of kind of the redo of a city street, you actually have to be kind of starting that conversation much further in advance. I've found that usually the state is thinking about 5 years ahead of construction when it comes to redesigning the street itself. And I would argue if we removed a traffic lane in each direction, made the sidewalks wider and lined it with street trees, people would see some incredible value up and down National Ave. And they already are, but we got to fix the street before that truly comes to life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know we're getting close to our time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I really wanted to get to a great question from Chad, who's asking about how we best balance this work to bring back this commercial vitality to historic neighborhoods, while also effectively addressing the risk of displacement of existing residents due to those economic forces. So that is the gentrification question, which I think is an important one for us to think about.
Yeah, well, you always have to be sensitive to that. And it's a reason why you keep existing building fabric. And it's a reason why, you know, you look to tax credits to kind of help the economic equation in that, you know, because if you have the existing building stock that you can, you know, easily convert spaces to living places that have an affordable rent or ownership model, you've gone a long ways. And again, advocate for low income housing to be mixed in to market rate developments. And, you know, I think the city's done a fairly good job of that, but it's always a balancing act. It's always a bit of a dance. But at the end of the day, it kind of requires everybody coming together and recognizing kind of the complexity of development, the complexity of thinking about a place as an ecosystem, and not just kind of a homogeneous place. So when you think about an ecosystem, all parts have to be contributing to the health of it. So you'll recognize fairly quickly if something's out of whack, you know, in terms of the rents and those kind of things. So think of it like a natural system.
Excellent. Well, awesome. We're at our 1 o'clock hour time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's hour lunch break. And thank everyone. Well, first, I guess thank TKWA and Chris for partnering with us on this. I think we'll agree this was just a really fantastic presentation, getting us to think about the value of these historic places and how they interact with the larger, as you said, ecosystem in the urban environment. And again, we are advocating for saving places because of that history, because of those stories, but also because they lend so much to the places that we live in today. And the preservation is something that makes our lives today better. And so it really is this focus on the now and the moving forward. So thank you for helping pull out some of that. I encourage anyone, you know, to continue the conversation. I'm going to put our email address in the chat. You know, please do reach out to us at any time. And with that, just want to thank Chris and thank everyone for spending time with us. And go out and safely with masks and enjoy the public realm and patronize the businesses in these historic buildings. And thank you for working with us to advocate for the value that these historic places bring to our community.
Thank you.
If anyone wants to turn on their video and say hi or goodbye, then feel free.
Thank you. That was really fascinating. I loved all the pictures.
Oh, thanks, Rachel.
Great job. Fascinating. There we go.
Oh, thanks, Jeff. Good to see you.
See you, Chris. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you, Jeff. I just got a question. Will the presentation be available afterward? And yes, I will be sending this out to everyone who registered, and it will be on our website as well. And encourage everyone to share it. The more people hear this, the better. Yeah, great. Thank you for all the compliments, everyone in the chat. Good to hear that this will make its way into a class at Marquette. Thank you, Patrick. I'll give everyone another minute or two if anyone wants to say hi, and then we'll go ahead and shut it down.
And thanks so much, Chris. There's a bunch of useful points in that. And I just remember, like, when I was doing my architectural thesis, I found a picture of National Ave from 1904, from like standing at 7th Street, looking back east towards town, and almost all of the buildings from that photograph are still there, like modified in some way. So I was very happy to hear that you identified that right off the bat as like potentially the next great corridor for development and historic preservation.
Yeah, without a doubt. National, just the fact that it stretches so far west too could just be such an important, it is important commercial corridor today, but you can imagine where it could go. So
Definitely, yeah. I loved hearing it. So, and excellent work. Thank you very much.
thanks, John. Appreciate it.
All right. Let's see. Great. Well, seeing no more questions, I'll go ahead and let everyone get on with their day, and thank everyone who's left once again for participating. Spread the word.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Talk to you guys later.